if the audience embrace the characters and the stories whom they first discover on the screen, maybe they first discover them in the books, but maybe they first discover them on the screen, that they will then want these characters and stories as part of their life.
On this day, the 12th of May, 80 years ago, in 1945, the Reverend Wilbert Awdry published his first book, The Three Railway Engines.
Sorry, let me just skip ahead of that.
Thank you.
Yes, today is the 80th anniversary of the Railway series, since the first book was published in 1945, which would then later become a hugely successful book series, which would later get turned into a TV show by the late Brittlecroft and David Mitton. But for the anniversary this year, I'd like to do something a lot more personal. Now right off the bat, it does sound like I'm copying Tug's video, but in actuality I'm doing what I thought he was going to be doing in his video, which of course he didn't. So in this video, I'll be sharing some stories of Thomas and friends throughout my life. But some of these memories, I remember very precise things about them, which is definitely a sign of my autism. My mum has already told the story of how I was introduced to Thomas, but for those who haven't seen the Watching Thomas with Parents video, when I was a kid, my mum would sit me by the telly and put whatever was on the kids' channels. To give you a rough idea, I was born in 2003, so I was raised with two channels in particular, CBeebies and Nick Jr. Whilst I remember a lot of the shows on these channels and certainly enjoyed them, some more than others obviously, hell, I'm old enough to remember when Peppa Pig was brand new, I never really grew a strong attachment to any of these shows. However, one day on that television screen was a little blue train with a face, and I was immediately hooked. But after going through some old photo albums, I recently discovered something that, no joke, completely shocked me. My mum claims that, yes, I loved Thomas, but there was a brief period in my early life where Thomas wasn't my number one favourite show. Yep, for the first few years of my life, Bob the Builder was my favourite show. So much so that 20 years ago when I went to New York, which today is the only time I went to America, which I don't even remember, my parents brought over a whole bunch of Bob the Builder DVDs, which to no one's surprise didn't work. And bear in mind, we didn't even know about the US dub. Not even my aunt and uncle from America knew about the two different dubs. But I want to say it was during that time where my Bob craze slowly started to die down a bit. Even when I returned home to the UK, I still watched the show, but not to the extent as before. But then, I want to say it was like late 2005, my parents bought me something that, little to their knowledge, would spark an entirely new obsession. That toy was the Calling All Engines Airport set by Tomy, and that set single-handedly kickstarted my love for Thomas. Now we can start talking about the specific memories. My very first memory of me being on this planet was walking in what felt like the middle of nowhere in an empty area with my dad and my cousins from America, which apparently was Legoland Windsor, which again I haven't returned to in like 20 years, but one memory stuck out to me. I remember seeing this big green train passing us, and the first thing I remember saying was,
"Look, it's Percy!"
And that was the first memory of my life I ever had, being Thomas crazy. Speaking of recognition through Thomas characters, you know Dumbo? That was one of the first films I ever saw. That and Bambi, I think. But my main memory from Dumbo was that I always used to call this guy the Fat Controller. And Casey Jr., the train in the film, I used to call him Edward. I mean, look at him, he does look a bit like Edward, doesn't he? Going back to that Tomy set, that's one reason I'd say Tomy is my favourite line of merchandise. Without it, I wouldn't be who I am today. But I specifically remember the order in how I got each of my engines, or even the day I got them. The second engine I ever got was Toby, which I still have to this day. Third was Diesel, but apparently that was a gift for another kid. But when my mum saw that I found it and opened the box, she just let me have it, claiming that I'd probably like it a lot more. To whoever was originally going to get that Diesel, I may have thrashed the motor by putting a 9-volt battery in it. Then it gets a little bit hazy from there, because I remember getting Gordon and James, but it might have been the opposite way around. But I believe in the middle of getting those two, I got Scar Loey. But what I do remember for a fact was that I got Douglas first, then Donald, which getting Donald may have been on the same day I got Diesel 10. I remember making up a Fireman Sam episode the same day I got Murdoch and Edward. My original Emily never worked out of the box, which was the only time that ever happened to me. And after buying Hank, I went to a cafe. I even remember getting Oliver. And then there's the most absurd memories I have with my Tomy stuff, because kids are bound to do dumb shit.
Kids are so dumb!
Like this one time I got Sir Handel stuck in my hair, or flushing Bulstrode down the toilet because he's supposed to be in the water.
You were gonna try and flush me? Let's see how you like it! I'm sinking!
But of course, Tomy wasn't the only line of merchandise I had growing up. When I was a baby, I had a huge amount of the Golden Bear toys that was given to me by one of my late uncles. In fact, I still have some of my old Golden Bear trains. We have James, but I think James was given to me at a different date. This was after I was a baby, so this would have been about, I think I was about 5 or 6, I can't fully remember. But for engines that I actually did keep since I was a baby was Henry, Diesel, Trevor, Daisy, and a talking Oliver, which no longer works anymore. I had a wooden railway figure 8 set, which I got annoyed for years because I lost Clarabelle. I had a decent amount of the take-along stuff, and another dumb memory I had was at my grandparents' house. There was this huge, water containers, I don't know what you call them, but I dropped Oliver, Stepney and Thomas down there and had a game of where I used to fish them out. And that was the last time I saw Stepney. Even when we got rid of those tanks, we never found him. It took me 14 years to get a new one. Sticking with Take-Along, there was this one kid that I knew who had a bunch of Take-Along toys, and we always used to play with them whenever I was around his house. But he also had a set, which was one that I had never seen before. An Ertl Quarry set that came with Bill. And before you ask, the last time I saw that friend, he had gotten rid of those toys. Going on, new interests sparked up like Disney Pixar's Cars and Royal Racing Car, but Thomas was still king of them all, with Bob being the prince. Now what's with playing with the toys without watching the show? I used to religiously catch the show all the time when it was on Nick Jr. I can vividly remember a young me in 2006 watching Series 10 for the first time as it aired. I was born when VHS was slowly fizzling out of shelves in favour of DVDs, and I did own a fair number of Thomas DVDs. In fact, the very first Thomas DVD I remember owning was the Daily Mirror promotional DVD. Oh no, out of all DVDs, it's that one. I had others, such as the main 3 Series 8 DVDs, which was some of my most watched DVDs, but then I was given a DVD called The Complete Third Series. And that was my favourite Thomas thing ever. I used to watch it to the point where it got scratched. I was so obsessed with all these characters I've never seen before, like Oliver, Boko, the twin characters, and especially Duck. Which, come to think of it, I might have been obsessed with Duck. I loved his episodes, and I really wanted to get him in Tomy form, but I just never did. I never got others like Boko, Lady, Neville, Duncan, but Duck was the one I really wanted, and I was so upset that I didn't get him. But back to Series 3, the narration from Michelangelos was a lot more energetic. The music was awesome, the sets were beautiful, and every time the next episode would play, this absolute banger of a theme song would play. Even the Brittlecroft jingle. As a kid, there was something so magical about hearing that jingle, and then followed up by that original theme song by Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell used was practically inescapable from any household I was in, to the point where it was the first song that I learnt on the piano. I remember being thrilled when I found out that Nick Jr. were rerunning every classic episode in 2010, so I did everything in my power to archive those recordings. I don't have them anymore, but man oh man, I lived off those digital recordings. I can't name you how many times I would rewatch episodes like Busy Going Backwards, Thomas and the Trucks, Duncan Gets Spooked, or The World's Strongest Engine. I of course had my fair share of scares from the show, most of which being from Series 6 surprisingly, despite it being one of my favourites back then. Like, I refused to watch Thomas Percy and the Squeak because of that scream, and I got really pissed off because the next episode was one I wanted to watch. So, most of my memories of watching the classic series was through TV airings. Let's go shopping for a bit. There was, and still to this day, a department store that I'd usually go to. And back in the mid-2000s, it would have a whole row filled to the brim with Tomy stuff, which is where I acquired the majority of my collection. It even had a Hornby section, and I distinctly remember being so enthralled by the idea of a Thomas and Bill set. There was also Toys R Us, but we'll get back to that later. Let's instead talk about shopping centres, or malls. Now, if you're around my age and lived in the UK, and maybe in the US as well, you'd have definitely recognised these sort of coin-operated rides. You know, the ones where you put like, 50p in them, and it would rock up and down. I remember riding the Thomas one multiple times, but my memories are very mixed. When I rode it for the first time, I absolutely loved it. Hearing the theme song, pressing the buttons, and recognising the Fat Controller's line from One Good Turn.
I need you to help the other engines.
I know what that is!
But then when the ride stopped, there was a sense in my body that was put in immediate fear. So from that day on, whenever I was at that shopping centre and rode that Thomas, whenever the theme song would play for a third time, I would beg to my mum and dad to take me off that ride because I did not want to be in that thing when it stopped. Now this next one, I don't actually have any proper recollection, but my mum does. When I was very little, when I was still in the age of being in a pram, I had a Thomas kite. And from where we were, it was close to the exit of the building, and then the wind picked up, and the kite flew to the top of the roof. And naturally, I was upset. Also, according to her, it was left like that for a good few weeks, if not months. God, imagine being a shopper in the mid-2000s on a sunny day and they see this kite-shaped shadow on the roof. And when they looked up, they saw this face staring down at them.
Hello.
Or years later, that face staring down at you from a tree.
I'm stuck.
I can't win with kites, can I? Now, books were everywhere. And no, I'm not talking about the Railway series, I'm talking about TV series tie-ins. There's this British home store called Matalan, and the thing I remember most from it was that they always used to have the My Thomas Story Library books on sale, and I used to have a couple of them, but recently I found something that honestly I thought I'd never see again. When I was a kid, I used to have a Thomas activity book, and when I threw it out, I thought I'd never see it again. It had these illustrations. I think Shauna said this in a video before, but I definitely agree with him. I loved these illustrations as a kid, even if Gordon does look a bit like Henry. But the main thing I remember from it was what the back looked like. It had a picture of Old Shape Henry from the My Thomas Story Library books. And like I said, I thought I'd never see it again. But thankfully, someone put it on archive.org. And looking through those pages, I literally had an Anton ego moment. I haven't seen any of these pages in over 15 years, and looking at them now just fill me with such a sense of nostalgia, because I loved this book when I was a kid. Maybe because it was the selection of characters in the book. You had Oliver, Donald and Douglas, Trevor, Bulstrode, even George of all characters. Of course, every kid has to go to school, and I remember on my very first day of nursery, I was given a birthday crown and a Tommy wind-up Thomas, which I have photographic evidence for. In that same nursery, they had a centered play table with Thomas stickers, and every few days they would change the toys. Sometimes it would be red wooden trains that I'd always used to pretend were Rheneas and Scar Loey. Other days it would have a full Tommy set with Thomas and Henry. But my favourite thing was a little play area with a few Brio trains. Thomas, Percy, Daisy, and Toby. And years later, my old teacher from my nursery would actually give me an Ertl Trevor. In reception, I wore a Thomas hat on a school trip. I found out about the Railway series for the first time, thanks to one of the books being the Thomas the Tank Engine book. And later in year 4, one of my support teachers would actually bring in her complete set of Woobert Awdry's books, which I was so fascinated by. But I think the most vivid memory from reception was watching the Hit Favourites VHS Ultimate Children's Favourites on one of those old wheel-up CRT TVs, which when Thomas was on, I ran to the front of the TV with my Lightning McQueen slippers to make sure I had a good proper view of Thomas to the rescue, and that was my only memory of seeing Thomas and Friends on VHS. In year 1, I brought my busted Tommy James into show and tell, and just said,
This is James.
And that's it. I once brought in Thomas and the Magic Railroad as a lunchtime movie, and in year 2 show and tell, I brought in my Hornby Thomas. On the topic of the movies, I remember seeing Magic Railroad so many times on DVD, which believe it or not, was the thing that convinced me that Sodor was a real place. I was a bit scared of calling all engines, but I still liked it enough to watch it again, and it took me a long while for me to see The Great Discovery, and when I did, I used to recreate the Rolling River Bridge scene a lot with my Hornby Thomas. Going back to year 1 quickly, I remember I went on a school trip to a lookout centre, and my group went up to the telescope room. And what was my first reaction to looking through the telescope? Looking in someone's garden and realising they have a Thomas table. Nothing grapples my attention more than Thomas! I must have been about 5 when not only my younger brother was born a few months prior, but Series 12 started airing, which I was kinda confused on why the engine's faces were moving, but I was rested assured when Michelangelos was still doing all the voices.
And I have to pick up the brass band from Brendan Docks. And I have to decorate my buns.
I actually remember making up a story about the Tommy suspension bridge being too low for the engines to fit under, so they had to be replaced with the red bridge pieces. And in my mind, the beams were alive and animated in the style of Series 12. Remember what the title of this video is called? Whilst on the topic of my imagination, and Series 12, the Children in Need music video. I remember seeing that when it first broadcast in 2009, and naturally I freaked out when I saw Thomas, but I've always had this thought about it. I always imagined that after the music video, Rory and Thomas would take a lap around Silverhatch. Even thinking about it now is so cool. It was also during 2009 that I saw Hero of the Rails for the first time. And I thought it was okay, but I wasn't too keen on the new change to CGI. But I wasn't too upset over it. I would still go back to my DVDs, and now that I discovered YouTube, I just watch uploads of the original episodes there. Or watch completely original Thomas videos. And some other Thomas videos.
The fat controller was chatting up some little boys on the telephone. "I'm naked," he said.
But then 2010 rolled around, and Thomas had finally met his match in the form of a mobile phone app.
Cinders and ashes, what's happened to our sheds? Bust my boiler!
Let's hit the pigs till they all go pop.
I was looking on my dad's iPhone to see what he was playing, and this was around the time where Angry Birds was still steaming hot, and after playing that one level, I had found my brand new obsession. From that day forward, Angry Birds became the dominant force of my life. I had every game downloaded, I watched countless plush videos on YouTube, and even got some of the plushes myself. and of course I got my hands on some of the toys. In fact, this bootleg set was the very first Angry Birds set I ever had, and I must say, for a bootleg, it was really good. Now we can talk about Toys R Us. Whenever I'd go there, I would first make sure I went to the Angry Birds section to see what was there, but I'd always make sure to check the Thomas selection too, because as much as Angry Birds was starting to become the next big thing, I would always make sure to make room for Thomas. In fact, the very first time I went to that Toys R Us, me and my dad walked away buying the Super Sodor Adventure set by Trackmaster. And then there was this one time I went to the same Toys R Us. I was in the Thomas section, which I can only assume was next to the Noddy aisle, because it played the Make Way for Noddy theme. But when it played the Thomas theme, I didn't expect to hear this. Yeah, for some reason it played the original end credits theme, which even as a kid I was taken aback by. And I think on that same day I bought pretty much all the Misty Island stuff. For as shit as Misty Island was, the toys were really cool. In 2011, I made my first trip to Thomasland, which originally I was supposed to go to a Day Out with Thomas event at the Dean Forest Railway, which never happened. So as a compromise, my dad took me to Thomasland, and I loved every single bit of it. From seeing the models in person for the first time after seeing them behind my TV screen for years, to riding inside Annie and Clarabelle being pulled by the #1 engine himself. In fact, I still have all the photos from my first visit. Look, here's me with Edward. And I remember going into the gift shop and buying a 2009 Trackmaster Gordon. I loved Thomasland so much that I returned again with my dad, brother and granddad, where my brother lost his wooden railway Percy there. This was also the last time I went to Thomasland, because I vividly remember the last time I went, James was still asleep in his siding.
I'm trying to sleep.
But it was during that time where I started to lose a fair amount of interest in this show. I think it was due to the new content being rather crap, and Angry Birds was just getting better and better, especially since Bad Piggies was released, and new additions to Angry Birds seasons were being made, which is peak Angry Birds by the way. I still watch my Nick Jr. recordings when, believe it or not, the first block I actually recorded had Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady, so I can safely say that
Sir Handel had been naughty.
has been a line that has stuck with me since childhood. I actually remember one time I came back from school, I think it was close to my birthday, and my dad built me a massive Trackmaster layout. The best way to describe it is, remember the Bluey episode Cubby? Imagine that, but instead of pillows, it's Tommy, Trackmaster, and Misty Island track. I would also catch up with the specials, but I think it was after Day of the Diesels where I just kind of felt unsatisfied. Blue Mountain Mystery was a bit better, which I remember bringing in for a lunchtime movie in year 4, which you gotta remember everyone was around 8 or 9 years old. But I want to also stress this, during my school life, I wasn't bullied for liking Thomas. Hell, I remember one of my teachers printing out a picture of Thomas for me and I played with it at break time. And on a different break time, I told one of my teachers the entire story of Thomas and the Jet Engine. But with all that aside, Thomas just wasn't as big as it used to be, unlike Angry Birds, and more recently I'd gotten into aeroplanes thanks to finding a documentary about Concorde's crash.
You are grim, mate.
I know it's a weird way to get invested into aeroplanes, but my granddad used to work at the airport and I always used to fly to Rome every summer. 2013 rolled around, Angry Birds and aeroplanes were still big, and it almost looked like Angry Birds would be my #1 favourite thing
In the world.
that was, until I stumbled across a YouTube video of one of the new Thomas episodes. This video had duck in the thumbnail. Duck? I thought to myself. Is this a classic episode I missed, or just a fake CGI render someone did? But sure enough, I watched the video, and it turned out to be the Thomas Way from Series 17. And oh my god, my faith in the show clicked back. I saw the rest of Series 17 and was thoroughly impressed with how really good it was. I saw King of the Railway and Tale of the Brave and thought they were pretty solid. Then the 70th anniversary rolled round with The Adventure Begins and Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. It really was a you had to be there moment of this franchise. Whilst nowadays I couldn't really care too much about the CGI series, but my god, the hype for those Arc-era stuff were unreal. It's a shame the merchandise went to shit. Like, I remember my dad coming back from Smith Toys with the brand new Thomas and James, and I was really confused and upset by the new changes they made to Trackmaster. But one memory I do have with Trackmaster 2 is that me, my brother, and my cousins, who knew the two of us liked Thomas, me more so than my brother, we would always usually play Demolition Derby with some of the trains from that merch line, even some of the older ones too. And on the topic of me, my brother, and my cousins, we would always play scavenger hunts with the Thomas Minis. Again, the only good thing about Minis. It was during that time where I also discovered about the fandom. Well, I technically discovered the fandom beforehand, thanks to the old YouTube videos. Hell, I got in trouble for watching one of Diesel D199's videos.
Ah, crap.
I guess the word fandom just didn't really register in my brain until 2015, 2016. I can vividly remember everyone being hyped for the Great Race and discussions about Journey Beyond Sodor, to which the reaction was very mixed, to say the least. It wasn't until late 2018 until I started a YouTube account. And 2019 I made a social account, being my Instagram, but nothing really Thomas related happened. I got into collecting home media and found a VHS that apparently we had for years. And then the 20-minute challenge. And then... Okay, this isn't even childhood territory anymore. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to pass the mic over to some other people, as they cast their minds back to their youth, and just like me, remember a memory with this little blue tank engine. That's oddly specific.
Shit, one oddly specific Thomas memory I had is when I was younger, I watched the episode Thomas Comes to Breakfast, and like, I really wanted to recreate the iconic crash from the episode with my toys. So I took the Trackmaster Thomas I had, placed it on the track, and at the end of the tracks, I didn't have like, you know, the Station Master building or anything, so I just substituted with the Lego Krusty Krab I had, you know? And then I would watch as Thomas would fucking charge towards the building, crashing straight through the front doors, and then running over the Lego SpongeBob, Squidward, and Mr. Krab figures, you know? Oh my god, bro. Shit was so funny. I did that like multiple times because I just liked watching Thomas crash through the building, you know? Complete fucking homicide, man.
When I was young, the back half of my house used to be a unit where my nan used to live, right? And shortly after she had passed away, we wanted to basically connect the house, basically make it one big house rather than units. So we built a doorway in the wall that divided the house. There was one time where during the construction of that, I was playing with my wooden railway trains in the rubble, like in the bricks and all that kind of thing, because I thought like, oh, it's like a little quarry, so I'll play with my trains. I was playing with my Flying Scotsman wooden railway train, and I noticed the gap in between like the walls. So I pushed in one of his tenders in there, and like I thought like, oh, it's stuck in there, but I can get it out, but I couldn't. And soon enough, the doorway was made. I kid you not, to this day, that Flying Scotsman tender is now still in the walls of the house. So I guess in a weird sense, the Flying Scotsman's a part of my house.
Okay, so my oddly specific Thomas memory is actually a Mandela effect that I have with something in the air. For some reason, for the longest time, I believed that 2 shots of the ending scene were actually switched around. The shot where Henry says, I'm sorry I was rude to you, Thomas. And the one after he says, oh yes. So basically the ending shot. As a kid, I always remembered it being switched around.
Can you smell something? What? Asked Henry nervously. Fresh air! Oh, yes, replied Henry. I'm sorry I was rude to you, Thomas. Oh, that's all right.
And then, once I realized it wasn't the case, I just had my mind blown and confused. Mandela effects sure are crazy.
Now, I'm fortunate enough, or perhaps more accurately old enough, to remember a time when these were still readily available on store shelves. The Ertl diecast toys. So, by that same merit, I have quite a few stories regarding certain members of my collection, several of which revolve around the theme of lost and found. Here's a photo. I'm on a steam train on the Heritage Railway. I've got an Ertl Emily. Life is good. And here's that Emily now. Except, I just said a lie. Because this Emily is not the same Emily in this photo. because that Emily never left the train. I just straight up forgot when we were leaving. Whoops. And on the subject of forgetting things, Rusty. Part of my collection of narrow gauge buoys that I took with me on a recent pilgrimage to the Talas Lynn Railway. But again, this is not my original Rusty. He also got lost. I'm not entirely sure where, but I have a theory. At my old house, I had a little play area with a sandpit and a huge dirt pile. I used to play with my trains in the mud and pretend it was one of the various quarries on Sodor. Childish imagination. However, that pile of dirt wasn't incidental. That was put there by my older brother, who was using it as foundations for the new fence posts. So, whilst I can't prove this exactly, my best guess as to where my childhood Rusty is that he is buried in the back garden somewhere. Alright, let's move on from the lost and talk about the found. Stepney. This Stepney I found on the roof. Let me explain. My old house had a rear extension which left a flat roof outside the back bedroom window on the first floor. So when one of my older brothers moved out and I moved into that bedroom, I had a look out onto the roof, and there he was. He'd been sat there, laying on his side, smiling away through rain and shine for God knows how long, and weirdly he doesn't look to have suffered that badly. Besides some sun bleaching on his exposed side, most of his original decals are present and correct, so must have done something right.
I'm not sure if this is a memory per se, but one thing my mum always told me was that as a young child, I would pronounce Annie and Clarabelle as Nanit and Clarabelle, as well as Dordin, Mavis. I think that's all it was for pronunciations. One thing that used to freak me out as well, specifically, I had this tape that was called NSPCC Children's TV Favourites Volume 2. And I used to be scared of the scene in Thomas and Gordon at the end, where he's going over a viaduct with the sunset. That bit used to scare me because I knew what was coming next, and it was the TV show Spider in the Bath, which fucking terrified me. Anyway, that's not specifically Thomas, but that was one of the memories I had of Thomas and Gordon, and it's something that stayed with me ever since, thinking, oh no, the scary spider's going to be on after this. As for Thomas itself, I was pretty freaked out by Henry squirting water out of his mouth in Something in the Air, and the crash in Thomas and the Special Letter.
My oddly specific memory is an example that everyone had an episode that they were frightened of, even if it wasn't meant to be a scary episode. I survived Season 5, and yet Season 8's Thomas and the Firework Display, specifically remember not liking that. Not even frightened of fireworks, but there's that one bit where Thomas and James pull up to the raid signal and Michael Andres is all like,
why would the signal be red?
And I don't know, there's something about that scene that was just a little bit unnerving. It might be sort of like the alarm of the situation, and it's a night scene, I guess. But I think it's also like the very pasty looking faces on the models at this point, seasons 1 to 7. The engines looked highly detailed, they had the glossy paint and everything, and then you get season 8 where everything's dumbed down a little bit. And I don't know, they look a little bit ghostly. Didn't like that, apparently. Whilst we're at it, can we also just talk about how the Fat Controller knows fireworks?
A sparkling dragon!
I'm just like, dude, you've run a railway. Why are you just suddenly interested in fireworks? Another example while we're at it, that signalman in Season 5 in Toby's Discovery, who's just randomly out in the middle of nowhere. The Fat Controller doesn't seem alarmed that he's employing this guy. I don't know, his eyes are like really big on the model, and yeah, I didn't like him. He can stay in the wilderness where his little signal box is between the castle and the mine, doing absolutely nothing, because I don't want him anywhere near me.
I still remember this, and I'm still angry about it. Back when it was the 7th anniversary, McDonald's, they did Thomas toys, which I was very excited about, and I didn't realize it was only a Japan thing only. So when I went over to my McDonald's, I was like really excited. I'm like, oh, they're gonna have Thomas toys, this is great. I get there, and it's fucking home. You know, the DreamWorks like Sheldon movie?
Good morning!
That fucking thing. Like, to this day, I'm still bitter about it. Because I'm like, we could have had really cool toys, but no. We had to have fucking home. I fucking hate home.
When I was in nursery, I was actually in a play of the Nativity. I played the innkeeper, but I wouldn't participate unless they named the inn the Thomas Inn. and lo and behold, they made a giant sort of cardboard cutout with Thomas's face. And that was the only way I would join in. I didn't remember any of my lines though, and instead proceeded to sing the Bob the Builder theme.
I've taken 2 months trying to think of something specific. So, after everything that happened, I decided to just default to the typical tactic of asking my parents if they could remember anything. And the first thing they mentioned was, well, there was always that Thomas we built for you. This, from 20 years ago, is me. And next to me, currently in brown, is what would later become my cardboard Thomas the Tank Engine. Let me explain. I loved Thomas as a kid anyway, and I have fond memories of watching the VHSs on a CRT TV down at the bottom of our wooden shed at the bottom of the garden. The one I have the most clear memory of is watching the ending of, I believe it's James and the Bootlace, specifically the version that has just the still of the ending of the episode with the scrolling credits. I believe that's like the very, very early season 1 style credits. Going back to Thomas, my dad wanted to make me a Thomas for a while just because he knew that I liked Thomas. So he, my brother and I all chipped in. We took a photo from the old Thomas website at the time, which you'll probably see in one of the images, and just started painting away. One of the images, I believe you'll see there is actual, like, in the cab there's actual controls and the like. You'll notice that there's like steam and water and little dials and whatever, and the fire hole door, which does open. Now this is a story that I think my parents don't know. Whenever they used to give me hot food and I wanted to wait until it had cooled down to eat it, I would open the fire hole door, put the plate in, and just pretend, oh, that's a nice roaring fire for Thomas to build up steam. There are bits and pieces where we didn't finish the paint work, but I think that just lends to the 2005 charm of it all.
Well, a very specific Thomas-related memory I have is when I first saw Rusty and the Boulder for the first time. I remember the experience very well. I was there with my sister on a computer, and when we tried showing it to my mum, she tried banning us from watching it because she thought it was too violent for us. So for the rest of the day, we just made Rusty and the Boulder drawings to annoy her.
I was introduced to Thomas at a very young age, thanks to a pirated VHS of the entirety of Season 1 I was gifted from a family friend. Unfortunately, being Italian, you can get the sense that I didn't have the best grasp of the language at the time, but this never got in the way from me understanding and enjoying the stories. One Christmas, thanks to other friends of my mom, I got my first fleet of take-along engines, which were the entire Season 1 cast, plus Doc. No Edward though. I got him later as a wooden railway toy and many years later in take-and-play form. Now, as I stated earlier, while my lack of English knowledge didn't stop me from enjoying the stories, it did however lead to some interesting results. Basically, when I was younger, I gave the wrong gender to some characters and paired them as couples, as the most cringe-worthy fanfiction you could find on DeviantArt. To this day, those cringe memories are haunting me. Also, for some reason, I remove all the eyebrows using my teeth from the engines. Toby unfortunately lost more than just the eyebrows.
When I was about 6, I used to make these picture books. I'd set up a little track with my Tomy train set. I'd borrow my mum's camera and I'd take pictures and make up little stories with them. Back then, you couldn't just copy the photos to the computer and print them out, so Mum would take me down to Boots to get the film developed. I'd bring the little packet home, I'd stick all the little pictures into these books with sellotape, and then I'd write all the little captions. The plots were interesting. The sole surviving book features Thomas crashing into no less than 2 walls. This had been around the time that A Better View for Gordon first aired on TV. It seems that one had quite an effect on me.
Well, one of the first memories that comes to mind is the first Tomy set I ever got. It came with Thomas, Annie, Clarabelle, and it came with Farquhar Station and Bulgy, and I just thought this was one of the best sets ever, because it's like, yeah, you came with road vehicles, came with Thomas, Annie, Clarabelle, you had a bridge, it had everything you could want. And I also got a Tommy Henry with logs and a little brake van, I think. And that was really cool too, because I had Henry and Thomas, and they just run around the layout. It was really cool. Another thing I got with them was, I think it was a Make Way for Noddy airplane set, and it came with like a little Noddy plane. It's just a really, it was a very nice Christmas when I got them. I remember the Henry was like in the stocking. It like filled up the whole stocking, which I just thought was so funny. It was just, it was a lovely memory, you know. I think I was like 4 years old at the time. It's just one of those, you know, sweet memories that you have from childhood.
So I've had several weird dreams about Thomas. Okay, the first dream I had. It was after season 24 released, and the franchise pretty much shit the bed. I had a dream where a new episode of season 24 released. Somehow, I don't understand the logic behind that. And the episode involved Diesel suddenly gaining shape-shifting abilities. So he turns into James and confuses the Fat Controller. I only remember this dream because I had this one interaction with my parents. They were trying to rob a fucking store, and I said no. And they were like, hey, if you don't help us rob the store, you're grounded. I'm like, fine by me. Second dream was a lost episode of season 3. It was something similar to No Joke for James, but it had more involvement from Gordon. But there was like a restored version and an original version, and the restored version was oddly cropped in some places, and the original version was like the film was pretty much eating itself. Side note, there was actually one real memory I have of making a Thomas-styled Herky from JJ the Jet Plane. Yeah, pretty freaky.
My oddly specific memory goes back to 2008, I want to say. I was 7 years old at the time, and one evening I brought my Tommy Diesel 10 with me in the bath. Did I remember to take the batteries out first?
No!
I played with my train in the bath as usual, and as I would normally do with my Tommy trains, I removed the top parts off and on again. Only this time, the battery looked a bit weird. Almost like the wrapping around it was peeling off and showing a white mineral substance coming from it. As children are known to discover things with their mouth, I got a bit of the substance from the battery and put it on my tongue. I remember it tasting salty. I mistook it for salt that we put on chips, and before I could try it again, my mum entered the bathroom to check on me and saw what I was doing. Frantically, she snatched Diesel 10 off of me and made sure I kept far away from the battery. Whatever happened to that Diesel 10 chassis, I have no idea, though I'm going to assume it got thrown out. But it does mean that in the sea of the more emotional, heartfelt specific Thomas memories you'll no doubt hear in this video, along comes me to say, yeah, thanks to Thomas and friends, I know what battery acid tastes like.
Now, my specific Thomas memory, aside from growing up with a brother who was massively obsessed with Thomas the Tank Engine, he had all the Trackmasters, he had the DVDs, and pretty much all the merchandise in between. We had Action Canyon, or is it Tumbling Bridge that it's called? No idea. Let me have a look at Tumbling Bridge. Thomas. Yeah, Thomas at Tumbling Bridge. That's the set we had. We still have all of these. They're up in our attic. Most of the Thomas stuff we still have. I mean, we've got like VHS tapes. We've got blankets and stuff like that. A lot of them are still around and they're still preserved to this day. The only one that really stands out for me is the kiddie ride. Now, I remember seeing it at a local shopping centre when I was a kid, and I hated the attract mode. It would scare me. Every time it went off, I would not go near it at all. It was like the plague to me. So, of course, when I see one in local park, well, not local park, but miniature railway, and I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe just this once. As soon as I got right up close to it, the attract mode went off. I felt my body just jump out of my skin. I literally freaking jumped and I literally ran as fast as I could. I swear down. I have been scarred ever since. I mean, it doesn't bother me that much now, but I mean, still does. I mean, it's sudden. Look, it's a sudden noise. There's no warning that it's coming.
A lot of my random Thomas memories revolve around when I got a certain character as a toy, and it was actually very useful because if I had these other childhood memories, like going on vacation or whatever, if I saw one of the characters in a photo, that would make me realize, like, oh, so that vacation or whatever was this year, 2 years earlier than I originally thought, because I would remember when I got those toys, So one example, I remember getting Thumper at Madrid airport. My mom used to bribe me with toys, so I'd behave on a plane. We were there on a layover on the way back from Lanzarote, and I remember getting Thumper in that exact interior of the terminal, especially when I look at photos of the terminal today. And another example, I remember going to the zoo with Wooden Gordon, and back then the zoo had a different entrance, San Francisco if you're wondering, but I remember asking my mom, would it be safe to bring Gordon in the zoo, or would the animals eat him? So just based on where we parked and where I asked that question, that made me realize this was before a certain date when the zoo built a whole new parking lot and entrance.
Thomas, for pretty much any British kid, is a very iconic and nostalgic franchise. Spending those afternoons on Nick Jr. watching a mix of the classic era to hit CGI was very enjoyable. I have quite a few memories with it, from watching my old cassette, jamming to Thomas You're the Leader airing on TV, and on the 65th anniversary promo they had on my Rainbow Magic DVD. Also, playing the games on the old Hit and Nick Jr. websites. But all of that's so simple. Nah, I want to go deeper, to the most obscure and relatively unknown nostalgia. Ever heard of the Bubble console? Oh, of course you haven't, this thing flopped. Back around 2012, my mum came back from a car boot sale with some Balamory and Tweenies DVDs. But instead of any episodes, it showed a menu with a play button. Turns out, they were DVD games from a niche kiddie console called Bubble. Very soon we bought the console, the remaining games, including Thomas Full Speed Ahead. From my memory, the games were really simple. They had one where you had to match the colours and shapes on screen with the buttons on the console. There was number counting, spot the difference and stuff like that, etc, etc. It came with a little booklet that had magnet pieces that connected with the console, so the DVD player could pick up which game you wanted to play. It was really interactive. I personally think it was a great device for toddlers and little kids as a first introduction to console gaming. It had recognisable characters for the time, and its big size would have been easy for them to use. It was a very of its time 2000s device. Sadly, the console just was not popular and had poor sales. More games from other shows were planned for it, like Bob the Builder, Angelina Ballerina, and even Dora the Explorer. I don't have my original console, but I did buy a used one a few years ago. I haven't had much of a go on it outside of testing the cartridges, but it doesn't turn on anymore, which is really strange. It's also missing the instruction booklet and the magazine that came with the original. Very little footage of the games are online, but luckily I managed to find this advert.
Discover the incredible Bubble from Bandai.
Maybe if they marketed it a little bit more, it could have been a success. Maybe in another universe.
Now, we've all done stuff with our Thomas toys when we were younger, or reenacted stories, or made stuff up as we went along, or lose them in rabbit holes, or they managed to get attacked by a lawnmower. But as for me, I put my Ertl D261 in the microwave. The microwave still worked, but the back of the Earl D261 melted, the back of his chassis melted, the wheels melted slightly, and he just had burn stains. I don't know what happened to that Earl D261. It's probably long gone now. And also, to anyone out there that tried to reenact the crash from Gorn Takes a Tumble with Tommy Gorn, we've all been there. You have my pity.
Okay, so my oddly specific Thomas memory is when, back in 2009, every time when I would go to Toys R Us, Target, or Walmart, I would see nothing but Hit Toys Trackmaster items. And I thought Tommy's discontinued since it was my favorite merchandise. So later in that year, I got a surprise that I'll be going to Day Out with Thomas in April. So right after I arrived to Day Out with Thomas, then I went to the gift shops. And at the gift shops, I saw there were Tommy items displayed for sale, and I was so excited, and I wanted to get one. There was a specific set I want. I think it's called Thomas at the Station, and I thought that Thomas that had all the details, and including the white running board, was exclusive to Japan, and I got excited, and I want that specific Thomas. So I asked my mom if I could get that set, and she said no, it was too expensive, and I was upset the whole day. But as an older person, as an adult, I finally got the set, and it turns out that box was a false advertisement. There was no Thomas with white running board in that specific set.
Thomas betrayed us!
So when I was a kid, me and my dad would spend every Saturday together. You know, in the morning we'd have eggs and we'd build a train layout and watch movies or whatever. You know, it was fun. You know, it was just a thing we did, and we did it for years. Like most of my early childhood, every Saturday was me and dad doing stuff. And I'd recently found out through YouTube, because before that, the only way I found out about new trains was on the little collector's pamphlets or on the back of the packaging. You know, obviously it was very early YouTube back then, so, you know, I wasn't like super into it the way I am now. But yeah, found out that Take Along made Oliver, and blew my fucking mind. Like, little kid Jay was freaking out when I saw Take Along Oliver, and they did like Toad and Scruffy and Boko.
Allegedly.
They weren't real, but they were there. So I told my dad about it, and he was like, right, let's go look for him. And we spent the whole day looking all over the city for Oliver. We found some pretty cool stuff. I got an Ertl Toad that day. Didn't keep him sealed, obviously, because it's Toad. His aftermarket is like -6p. Toad! In the last shop we went to, it was like a little market stall, and they had the blister packaging with like the shell that goes over the engine. There's like the printed track underneath. They had Oliver. So we got him, and I've just never forgot that day. I can remember where I got pretty much every engine. It's kind of crazy how I have an eidetic memory for that kind of stuff, yet I forget so many things so often. You could tell where my priorities are.
I recall one time when my parents were out of town and I was just, you know, flipping channels looking for something to watch. I flipped the channel to Sprout, rest in peace. I caught the tail end of the episode Fish from season 4. I just saw it.
Then there was trouble.
And Duck crashing into the back of the train. So this is before I had a really good internet connection or any type of device to connect to the internet. So I was completely dumbfounded and shocked at what I saw, because of course I had no context to what the hell just happened. So I just, you know, told my grandparents, like, wow, look at this. And then I told my parents when they got home from the airport, and I said, hey, this episode, it just started with, and then there was trouble, and it just ended there. And they're like,
wow, very cool.
Very cool.
And last oddly specific memory I'll share was the time when I went to the St. Louis Transportation Museum. And what do I see when I walk in? The season 8 airing of Thomas Gets It Right, What's the Matter with Henry, and As Good as Gordon. Every time I flipped on PBS, I'd seem to catch that episode. So I really, really, really hate that.
I mean, I don't really have much to say in terms of an ending for this video, but looking back on everything, I've been through many different phases in my life. At a very young age with Bob, into the gaming scene with Angry Birds, which in turn made me interested in others like Minecraft and FNAF, and even more recent additions like Bluey and Indigo Park. But it seems like whatever it is, I would never consider them my favourite of all time. Just goes to show how much of an impact this little talking train has had on my life. It also goes to show the longevity that Thomas has. You can be a 70-year-old man or a 55-year-old woman and still love Thomas. And it doesn't matter what part of the world you're from, Japan absolutely love Thomas. Whether it be because of the music, the model work, or just the love affair of trains in general, there's something in it for everyone. Of course, other shows have their merits and charm, like Bob, Sam, Pat, and even Bluey. But I guess what makes Thomas separate from them was how real it felt. Yes, the other shows I just mentioned have something real about them, but it just kind of goes for the fact that trains have something about them that feels humanized.
Now, a steam engine is an extrovert. He likes to know, likes you to know, how he's doing or how badly he's being treated.
Yeah.
He's always got something to say.
But I think the main reason for me of why Thomas stood the test of time is simply Thomas is a part of who I am. He's been there for every major event in my life. He's like a security blanket to me. Whenever I feel stressed or feel like shit, I just stick on an episode and all my worries just wash away. And here we are in 2025, and my love for Thomas is just as strong as it was in 2005. And it probably will be the same in 2045 for the 100th anniversary. And to be honest, I think Miss Jenny put it best.
I wouldn't have it any other way. A small boy presented him with a gold medal on a red ribbon. I thought you should have a medal of your own. My very own medal, said Thomas. Thank you.
3 cheers for Thomas, the #1 engine. Hip hip hooray!
Thomas just beeped happily.